Go in the other way, please. Oh, I thought you were going in there.
Bro, you guys are dumbasses. See what I mean? We're just gonna slip.
I love the look, and they're really lightweight.
Also great colors. They're really pretty.
The effect of seeing your own face on camera, because it's reminding you that you're supposed to be acting a certain way, and that is especially a stressful thing.
Yeah, you can't be in the moment as much. But I mean, for you make the decision to do all your podcast interviews in person, right?
Yeah.
And
that's even when it's very costly. If there's any kind of chemistry that contributes at all to the conversation, which I think most conversations have chemistry, even the boring work meetings, there's something there. Because yes, you're trying to solve a particular problem at this particular time, but underneath it, there's a team building that's happening. And honestly, people also have told me about this, why they enjoyed the Zoom meetings during the pandemic, is like they're lonely.
yeah.
Like it's annoying to have to sit and listen to folks talk about nothing and so on, but they tune in anyway, because it's kind of lonely to sit there by yourself, and that, I mean, there's a deep connection there when you're with other people, and that is especially true when you're there in person, which is a huge concern for me, for like more and more offices from a capitalist perspective, realizing, hey, why do we have these large office spaces? Why do we have to get people together? But I think in some deep sense we do. But then you also talk about that once we do, we want to protect the introverts. Like, you don't want the open space, office space, which was a big fad for a while. I don't know where people stand on that at this point.
Yeah, I think people are figuring it out in a post-pandemic context, but I mean, I know what you mean. So before I became a writer, I was a corporate lawyer for like 7 years, and literally the only thing I missed from those years is hanging out with people at the office. Like, I don't know, just some of the funniest moments I've had in my life came from being at the office until midnight with the other people I was working with. So I know exactly what you're talking about. Though I will say the office is there at that firm and at most firms in those days, everybody had their own office. So it was like a dorm room, you know, where it was like a long hallway, everybody in their own little dorm room. So you had tons of privacy, but you would also come out and hang out with
You
people.
could just
and I
kind
think
of
that,
roam whenever you want.
yeah, yeah.
And whenever you roam, that means you're kind of open. You're looking for trouble.
Yeah,
You're open for interaction.
and the extent to which you would keep your door open, you know, was it wide open or was it half ajar or just a little bit? Those were all signals.
So is there, because you said re-energize, is there, do you like to think, and again, the human mind is complicated, but do you like to think of it as like a bucket that gets refilled for introverts in terms of energy, of social interaction that they're able to handle? Do you think of it like that, as a bucket that gets emptied and needs to be refilled?
I think of it, yeah, more or less, because I use the metaphor of a battery that gets recharged or not. It's basically the same thing, different metaphor. But yeah, but just to add on that there is a layer of complexity to that, because you could be somebody who doesn't want the kind of social life, let's say, where you have to be like on and presenting and interacting with tons of people all the time, but you'd get really lonely if you were just by yourself. You know, so what you want is to maybe be in the company of a couple people you know really well. Like for me, the pandemic was not actually that hard for me personally. I mean, I lost family, but I mean, from the point of view of what we're talking about, it wasn't that hard because I live with my husband and my kids. So I knew it was hard on the kids and I felt badly for them. But for me, I was like, you know what? I have a lot of social life right here in the house.
That's why
and I can focus and do my work. Yeah, yeah.
That's the cool thing about the pandemic. I think it helped people figure out how much they love their family.
I think that's true.
And give you a chance to really reconnect with kids, with your kids, like really spend time with them. It's just fascinating to watch. Like people actually, it did strengthen the family unit in a often beautiful way. Which just sucks to have to leave behind at this point.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what people are not going to want to go back to, that we need to solve for, to the extent that work becomes non-remote again. I think people have just realized how precious those aspects of their lives are. And, you know, for somebody who's in a conventional office job where you're going home and seeing your kids for an hour before bedtime, and that's your interaction with them, that's kind of a ridiculous way to set things up.
Yeah, it's cool that I think a lot of places give you the option now, which is interesting. You get to optimize that element of your life. Do you take the commute and the office work and the social interaction there, or do you focus on the work at home? It's also lonely at home, but then you get to see your kids if you have kids. That's part of the optimization, is like, I have some options now, and I'm going to try to optimize solitude, loneliness, happiness, productivity, seeing family, seeing coworkers, the chemistry with the team building with the coworkers versus just the raw exchange of information with the coworkers. It's fascinating to see how that kind of evolves.
Yeah, and then there's the third space idea of, you know, the spaces where you're in a co-working space or a cafe or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
So you've got other people around you, but you're not exactly interacting with them, but they're very much there, and that's huge too. I don't think we think about that enough.
Yeah, that energy is there.
Yeah. I lived in Manhattan for 17 years before we had kids,
Yeah.
and I absolutely loved it. Like, I loved it, the feeling of all that energy all around you, but you could be anonymous within it. To me, it was perfect.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Like I worked this morning for a few hours, programmed for a few hours at a Starbucks, and first of all, like wearing suits, like Manhattan is the one place you can kind of fit into because everyone's wearing suits.
Do you wear suits every day?
Well, these days, unfortunately, because I get recognized, I wear usually not suits when I just on my own life. But yeah, I love it. I love the way it feels. I don't know. And the way I think about the world when I wear a suit, I take it seriously, as if my life is gonna end today. Like, this is what I would want to wear, not for physical appearance, but just for some reason it makes me feel like focused. I don't know.
So even if you're not going to see anyone, you would still put the suit on when you're doing your work?
Especially then.
Really?
Especially then, yeah. Yeah, I really love doing that.
So it like tells you seriousness of purpose, something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Like everything's
Makes me
elevated
feel.
now.
I don't know what it is. I don't know what I imagine exactly, but it's some kind of platonic form of like a mixture of James Bond and like I don't know who else. Richard Feynman. Can I think about when I think about a suit?
You know, I think of Leonard Cohen, but he was always wearing suits too. But you know,
Leonard Cohen is definitely one of my. Is a tragic human. Is a beautiful human being.
Yeah, yeah.
Through his words, through his own private life. Yes, I definitely would think about Leonard Cohen. So, small talk. That's another thing. Is that part of the equation of introvert versus extrovert?
Well,
How much people enjoy small talk?
I kind of went into this whole thing thinking that it was, but from what I've seen, most people studies that most people don't like small talk. I think that's why people like your podcast, because you're like, forget the small talk. I'm going deep into it from the very beginning.
Yeah, so it's actually the picture you're painting is like the way you started, like with your with the book Quiet, and the way you are today is you realize the picture may be more complicated.
Yeah, everything's more complicated. I will say with the small talk thing that I'm curious if you have this experience, but I find it fantastic to have a career where I'm known for anti-small talk kinds of topics, because it means that anywhere I go, like if I show up at a conference or something like that, no one does small talk with me. They're like telling me about the deep truth of their lives from the first hello. And I love that. And in normal life, you have to like wade through a lot before you know if people are ready to go there.
Yeah.
Do you have that experience too?
No, definitely with people that know me for sure.
But you forget how many people feel like they know you because of your podcast.
Well, that's what that counts. Because I'm
Yeah.
a huge fan of podcasts, and I feel it like before I ever became friends with Joe Rogan, I felt like I was friends with him because I was a fan of his podcast. And so like it was. I feel like it's a friendship. I know it's a one-way friendship with all the people I listen to in podcasts, and even people who are no longer with us, like writers. I feel like I have a relationship with them. Maybe I'm insane.
No, I totally feel that way. That's the whole reason I became a writer.
Like I'm friends with Leonard Cohen.
Yeah.
And he's not aware of it.
No, but I think that's the whole reason for writing or making music or whatever people do. It's to be able to have those kinds of connections that don't require having to be in a room together, because there's only so many people you can be in a room with in your lifetime.
The hard thing is unfortunately, because I value human connection so much, and I only have, just like you mentioned, sort of a small circle of people I'm really close with by design, it always hurts me a lot to say goodbye to people. Like you meet people, and you can tell they're beautiful people, they're amazing, there's something so fascinating about them. They've had a complicated life, like you can see in their eyes and the way they tell their story in just a few sentences. They've gone through some shit, but they also found some elements of beauty, and then you get to realize, okay, well, there's a fascinating human here, and all you get to say is a few words here and there, like a funny little joke, maybe a dark joke here and there, and then you just say goodbye, maybe hug it out, and you go on your way. So like that's a hello and a goodbye. Your paths will never cross again. That makes me like a sad walk away. But I guess I wouldn't have it any other way, I suppose, is the reality is. In your book, you talk about that sorrow, that sadness not being such a bad thing.
Yeah, and when you just said that, I just thought of this one moment in my life that I haven't thought of for 20, 30 years or something. But it was when I was in law school, and a classmate of mine had his friend come to visit for the weekend, and the three of us hung out a lot, and we just had, like an amazing time. And then this other guy who wasn't going to be coming back anytime soon, if at all, sent a postcard to me, and the only thing written on the postcard was this quote from Oscar Wilde, and I don't remember the exact words, but it basically said that there's no pain as intense as the sorrow of parting from someone to whom you've just been introduced.
Yeah.
And there's something so intense about that,
Hey, Lucas, I need your
and
help.
so true. think partly also because when you've just been introduced to somebody, you don't yet know their difficulties. So you're seeing the most sparkling version of them. You're seeing like a platonic version of love and friendship.
And your imagination fills in the rest in some beautiful way that matches perfectly the kind of thing you're interested in. That's how I feel about one scoop, like one spoonful of ice cream. That's why you always finish the whole tub, and you regret all of it. You do say, where did you write this? I think this is on your website, that one of the best things in the world is that sublime moment when a writer, artist, or musician manages to express something you've always felt but never articulated, or at least never quite so beautifully. So that's the Oscar Wilde line is one line like that, but just a line from a song or maybe a piece of art that just grabs you. Is there something that jumps out into memory like that for you?
I don't know if I have an exact line, though. I mean, that feeling that you just quoted happens to me all the time. I'm just bad at recalling exact instances, but
On the spot.
but the writer Alain de Botton regularly makes me feel that way. He's just this beautiful essayist and like observer of human nature, and he's just constantly expressing things in this gorgeous way that you've experienced yourself, and you feel like, I don't know, it's just this grand act of generosity. You know, you feel less lonely. You feel like this deep sense of communion. It's such an elevating experience.
Even when it's like a melancholy line.
Maybe especially when it is.
Yeah, what is that? There's the Jack Kerouac on the road definitely makes me feel that way. Like every other line in there. Forlorn rags of growing old.
Do you know, I never read that book. So what was it about that book that made you feel that way?
Well, okay. Well, since you asked,
I
I'm
do.
I'm going to linger on this. So there's a story. He's kind of the book, the kind of defining book of the Beats, the Beat generation, and it's basically a story of a writer who takes a road trip across the United States a couple of times and experiences a few close friends and a few strangers along the way. And there's a lot of just those melancholy goodbyes along the way. You meet all these people with interesting lives. Some of them are defined by struggle, some of them are defined by drugs, drinking, women, all that kind of stuff. And still, he just kind of dances around all of that and is defined by the goodbyes and the passing of time. So a lot of the really powerful lines are basically like, there's one on there, again, I don't remember exactly, but he meets a beautiful girl at a restaurant, and the girl is getting, or a woman is getting on a different bus than he's getting on. And it's that like feeling of falling in love for like a second and realizing that like fate is just ripping that out, which is similar to this idea of it sucks to say goodbye just when you met, but it's especially true when you fall in love just a little bit with that stranger, with all the possibilities that could lay there. So there's a few lines of written down. I went down this whole rabbit hole of thinking, what are the lines that grab me? A couple of lines from On the Road. So one is, what is that feeling when you're driving away from people and they recede on the plane till you see their specks dispersing? It's the too huge world vaulting us, and it's goodbye. We'll lean forward to the next crazy venture beneath the skies. So this is him talking about leaving a particular city. The spoiler alert, towards the end of the book, line I return to often. It's more poetry, but it's a feeling that captures the book, I would say. The evening star must be drooping and shedding her sparkler dims on the prairie, which is just before the coming of complete night that blesses the earth, darkens all the rivers, cups the peaks and folds the final shore in, and nobody knows what's going to happen to anybody besides the forlorn rags of growing old. And it just captures this kind of in-the-moment appreciation of the beauty of the world and a sadness over the fact that time passes and you leave the people you love behind, you leave the places you love behind, or at least the way they were. at the time that you really enjoyed them, and you just leave that all that just the sadness you feel when you something about it. Like looking at a picture, looking at your kids grow up, looking at old friends getting old. Something makes you realize that time passes, and somewhere deep in there is probably a realization of your mortality, and then it just makes you somehow first sad that everything comes to an end, and then that's immediately followed by sort of an appreciation of the moment, like a gratitude that you get to experience this moment.
Yeah, I know it exactly. I mean, that's the whole reason that I wrote Bittersweet. It's all about that. So I know intensely what you're talking about. And by the way, my husband loves the book A Movable Feast by Ernest Hemingway, which I also haven't read, but it talks about that same thing. You know, groups of people traveling around together, and the group coalesces into some magical formation, and then one person leaves the group, and it's never going to be the same again, and then they move on to the next one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the deepest essence of human nature. The feeling of longing for some kind of state of perfect completeness, completion, perfect love, Garden of Eden, all of it. And the feeling that you're never going to quite attain it, but you get glimpses of it here and there, and that those glimpses are some of the best things that ever happened to us. And they're suffused with sadness because they're not the real thing, or they're not the full thing. They're just a glimpse. It's a glimpse of what we long for.
So the sadness that we might feel is always connected to the ways in which we fall short from the perfect thing that we're, like there's always the thing you're longing for, and the sadness has to do with the getting a glimpse of it but not quite getting a hold of it.
Yeah.
So it's always losing.
It's always losing, but it's also always that. But it's not. That sounds really depressing, but it's not. You know, it's not depressing because you experience this all the time. It's also. Those are the most beautiful moments I think life offers. I mean, it's intense beauty in those moments because it's getting closer to the real thing that we long for.
So what about, like, loss, losing love? Is that also a beautiful thing?
Well, the moments you're talking about, I think it's easier to appreciate the beauty of it all in the moment because you're kind of experiencing the loss and the love all at the same time. Whereas if you're talking about straight up loss, like a betrayal or a bereavement or whatever it is, it's different. It's quite overwhelming.
So losing a loved one kind of thing.
Losing a loved one. I mean, I will say that the truth that I think that we can come to after a lot of time on this earth is the idea that love exists not only in its particular forms, so not only in the form of the one person, you know, that one person we love or that other person we love, but love itself is a state that we have access to. And so over time, the loss of person A can heal and you can tap into a kind of bigger river of love.
Yeah, I mean, I had this. It comes from Louis C.K. In a show. Damn, I love that line. I mean, he talks to an older gentleman, and Louis is all like sad about losing a loved one or like getting rejected, essentially, like a breakup.
Mm-hmm.
And then the older gentleman gives him advice, saying like. Basically criticizes Louis for saying, why are you moping around? Because this is the best part. Like, losing love is the best part. Because that's the real loss is when you forget. Like, feeling shitty about having gone through a breakup is when you most intensely appreciate what that person meant to you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Like, you most intensely feel love in some strange way by realizing that you've lost it, by missing it, wishing at this moment I wish I had that. Like that feeling, that's when you feel that love the most, the absence of it. And so the older gentleman gives advice that's the best part. And it can, if you're good with it, it can last for the longest. It could be the most sort of prolonged experience of deep appreciation and emotion and so on. So that's kind of that's a nice way to look at loss, which is a reminder of how much somebody meant to us.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of truth in that. Because, yeah, you wouldn't care so much if it weren't something that mattered to you. So it's always a signpost to the direction you really want to go to. That's always what it is. Yeah, and it's interesting to see the way that the mystical versions of many of the great religions all point in this direction. You know, whether you're looking at Sufism or the Kabbalah or in Christian mysticism, you see this idea that the longing for what you lack is the very thing that gives you what you're longing for. So the longing is the cure. I mean, that's the way the Sufi poet Rumi puts it. The longing is the cure. You know, and he says, be thirsty. Like, be as thirsty as you possibly can. That's what you want to be.
The good stuff is the wanting, not the having. Yeah. Of course, tell that to a person that just broke up, and they'll be like, "Shut up, asshole." Advice sucks. I wish I had her or him back.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Those are the kinds of life lessons that only work when you kind of step away for a while. They don't work in the moment, in the moment of excruciation. There is something about the fact of knowing that all humans are in that experience together that is also incredibly uplifting.
But that takes time for people to realize. Like, like heartbreak in your early teenage years or something like that could feel like this is completely the most novel
Yes.
and the most dramatic pain that any human has ever felt, right? Or maybe even when you're younger. And then one of the things you realize is that everybody goes through this. There can be an awakening to the fact that we're all in this together. This human condition is not just a personal experience; it's an experience we all share, and that's a kind of love, the unity of it.
Yeah.
You can get to experience.
That's a really deep kind of love, and I feel like, you know, we're prevented from perceiving that love as, it's actually like the most obvious kind of love, and it's right there, and it happens all the time, but we're prevented from perceiving it because we're not really supposed to talk about things like that. It's like there's something unseemly about it.
Well, it's also in the West, it's an individualist society, so like there's a pressure to sort of see the individual as a distinct sovereign entity that experiences things, and it's not the unity between people is not obviously sort of communicated or talked about or is part of the culture.
Can we go in the
Yeah,
car
it's
for
not
a
part of
while?
the culture, and yet,
do what?
you know, you see it in our behaviors because
To get wet?
we're humans.
Can we go in the- can
So,
we go
you
in
know,
the
why do
car
people
if
listen
you
to
know
sad
where-
music? I mean, one reason is
I'm
they're
sick.
hearing expressed for them. Like the musician is basically saying to them, this thing that you have experienced, I've experienced it too, so have lots of other people. And that they're saying it all without words, and it's transformed into something beautiful. And there's something about that that's just incredibly elevating.
I'm just waiting for a
And people
Dutch
don't
man
know
to go
it,
in
but-
there.
Like there's one study that I have in Bittersweet that found that people whose favorite songs are their happy songs play it on their playlist about 175 times. The people who love sad music play them about 800 times. And they say that they feel connected to the sublime when they're listening to that music.
What do you think that is? So what is that? What is it in music that connects us to the sublime through sadness?
I mean, I have a bunch of different theories. Like, the whole reason I started writing this book is because I kept having this reaction reliably to sad music. And I realized that for people who I knew who were religious believers, the way they described their experience of God was what I was experiencing when I would hear that music. And, like, all the time. It happens over and over again.
So you wonder what that is.
And yeah, so I started wondering what that is. And lots of people have tried to figure out, you know, what that's all about. And there are different theories that it's like a kind of catharsis for our difficult emotions. That it's, as we were saying, a sense of being in it together. we don't react in that sort of uplifted way when you just see like a slideshow of sad faces, which is something researchers have actually tested. No one really cares when they're seeing the sad faces, but the sad music, they're really reacting. And also, they don't really react when they're hearing music expressing other negative emotions, like martial music or something like that. It's just the sad music that gives people this elevated sense of wonder. So I think it's the combination of the sadness and the beauty, and I think it's just tapping into the essence of the human source code, which is a kind of spiritual longing. Whether we're atheists or believers, there's this feeling of longing for a state and a place of perfect love and perfect unity and perfect truth and all of it. And like an acute awareness that we're not there in this world. And, in religions, we express that through the longing for Mecca or Eden or Zion. And artistically, we express it with Dorothy longing for somewhere over the rainbow, or Harry Potter enters the story at the precise moment that he's become an orphan. So he's now going to spend the rest of his life longing for these parents who he can never remember. And there's something about that state that's at our very core, and I think that's why we love it so much.
Well, it could be, you could have the Ernest Becker theory of denial of death, where at the core of that, the warm at the core, as Jung said, is the fear of death. So where the longing for the perfect thing has to do with sort of becoming immortal, is reaching beyond the absurdity, the cruelty of life, that all things come to an end for no particularly good reason whatsoever, or one we can rationally explain.
I know, I wonder about that all the time. Like, I know obviously there's that idea from Becker and throughout philosophy and the Tale of Gilgamesh about the idea that the thing we're longing for most of all is immortality. But I feel like it's not only that. I think it's more so, or also, let's say, a longing for the lions to lay down with the lambs, finally. For like the fundamental calculus of the universe to just be different, where life doesn't have to eat life in order to survive. And yeah, just a completely different situation.
I wonder.
That immortality would not solve.
I wonder. That could be a very kind of modern thing. Because surely so much of human history is defined by violence and glorified violence that doesn't give inklings of this lions and the lambs. So much of...
I mean, I know all the other stuff is in the Bible too.
There's other stuff in the Bible, and the Bible that particular aspect doesn't necessarily reveal the fundamental motivation of human nature. There could be deeper stuff, But that is a beautiful picture. But is it just about humans, or is it all about all of life? And you have to think about, what does the perfect world look like? It's not just the lions and the lambs laying together. It's, how many lions, how many lambs?
Right.
And, what, having just had a few very technical conversations about Marxian economics versus Keynesian economics versus neoclassical economics, what does the economic and the government system look like for the lions and the lambs that we're longing for? So then you start to build society on top of all those things, and but you return to this. What is it? What are we longing for? And what's the role of love in that? What's the role of that sad, melancholy feeling? The feeling of loneliness? Is the feeling of loneliness fundamental to the human condition? Like, are we always striving to sort of channel that feeling of loneliness to connect with others? Like, we want that feeling of loneliness, otherwise we wouldn't be connecting. Is that fundamental? That feeling like you're alone in this, even when you're with other people, sort of alone together. You're born alone, you die alone. Maybe loneliness is fundamental.
I think the longing for union is fundamental. It's just that it looks so different for different people,
Right. Yeah.
And coming back to what we were talking about at the beginning, union looks incredibly social for a lot of people and hardly social at all for others, but everybody needs some version of union.
Yeah, people have been telling me recently about polyamory and all those kinds of things. So I'm having probably grown up in a certain part of the world. I think I'm very monogamy centric. Not in a judgmental way, just for me, what makes me happy is one person for my whole life. Basically, just dedication.
Yeah.
Because I've just seen the relationships with people and objects in my life, the longer we stay together, the deeper the tie.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a empirical thing, and yes, that probably is a personalized thing. That's just true for me. It could be very different for others. Maybe it's connected to the introverted thing, maybe not. Um, who knows? Before I leave, because you mentioned songs, sad songs. What are we talking about? What's a good what song do you remember last crying to?
Oh gosh. Well, I mean that's
Don't say Taylor Swift.
I literally dedicated my book to Leonard Cohen. He's played such a huge role in my life. Like I love him. And I've loved him with this crazy love that I've never been able to understand for decades. I think I understand it a little better now. But
So you're better friends with him than me. I'm jealous. So does it make you? Is it the musician or the human too? Because the human is a tortured soul in a way.
I'd say it's the musician. It's the musician. I actually was thinking about this the other day. I mean, obviously he's not alive anymore, but I was kind of running the thought experiment. You know, if he were alive still and I had the chance to meet him in person, would I want to do that?
Mm.
And I'm not really sure that I would, because he represents for me symbolically everything. Well, everything. I'll end the sentence right there. And so, and I think that's okay. You know, I think people can express something through their art that they might or might not express if you were just like hanging out with them and having a coffee. And I'm happy to know him that way.
He can express himself, I'm sure, in the way that you know him as over coffee too.
Yeah,
It just requires like a focus of remembering, of like a deep focus of connection. That's why when I interact with folks, it's so draining for me because I'm putting all my whatever weapons I got in terms of like deeply trying to understand the person in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
And doing that dance of human interaction, the humor, the intense kind of delving into who they are, which requires like navigating around like small talk type of stuff and just like compliments and so on. In general, like people, depending on the culture, depending on the place, they'll sometimes flower stuff with smiling and like compliments like, oh yeah, I love you, this is great, blah, blah, blah. Like that's all great, but you want to get to the core of like what are the demons in the closet? Let's talk about it, you know. And that could be exhausting. That can be really exhausting. So from a Leonard Cohen perspective, you get more and more famous. It can be hard sometimes because he probably is also an introvert.
Oh yeah, I know he was an introvert because he actually tweeted about my book when it came out. So that was a precious moment for me. Something about we should all be listening to the quiet. I can't remember exactly what he said. But yeah, no, he definitely was.
He struggled with depression, which I wonder if that's something that's also connected to introversion. But perhaps not actually. Perhaps that they're very disjoint, and also
It's connected to sensitivity, and many sensitive people are introverts. So it's kind of like a Venn diagram.
Well,
About 80% of highly sensitive people are introverted, but then some are extroverts. And then not all introverts are sensitive, so it's complicated. But he was definitely a sensitive type.
well, there's on top of that, you see like the percent of artists relative to the average that suffer from depression. So creative people
Oh yeah,
is very high.
very
It's crazy.
Yeah, and then the number of artists, successful artists who were orphaned when they were young, who lost one parent or both parents, like an astronomical number. I have it in the book. I don't remember the percentage, but huge. And he was one of them. He lost his father when he was 9, and his first act of poetry was he took his father made suits. That's why I thought of him when we were talking about you in your suit.
Yeah.
And he took one of his father's bow ties and wrote a poem in his honor and buried the poem and the bow tie in the backyard. and that was like his first creative act.
You know that song, Chelsea Hotel Number 2,
Sure.
where he met, I guess it's about Janis Joplin.
Janis Joplin, yeah.
Oh, what a fun, intense, and cruel person she is.
Yeah.
So I guess.
Have you ever seen, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but have you ever seen his son, Adam Cohn, and Lana Del Rey perform that song together?
Oh, wow, no.
It's incredible. I have to send it to you.
Yeah. So that for people who don't know, maybe I don't know. It goes, I remember you well in the Chelsea Hotel. You were talking so brave and so sweet, giving me head on the unmade bed while the limousines wait in the street. There's a good line in there about being ugly.
Oh yeah, we are ugly, but we have the music.
No, before that, from a guy's perspective, it was.
Okay. Oh, you told me again you preferred handsome men,
yeah.
but for me, you would make an exception. Yeah, so good. So
Well,
good.
she continued that thread in later because I think she said that he was lousy in bed.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, she publicly said that, which is like, man, there. Just okay for people who don't know. I think this is a true story about them interacting and being together for a very brief time. I don't know, dating, but just connecting, falling in love, or in this very particular way that I think famous musicians, poets can, which is like it's impossible for that kind of thing to last. But they did it for a brief moment. There's like a sadness to it because it's so momentarily, but it's so epic.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
these two paths cross, and then you just look at we know these famous people, and it's interesting to watch.
Yeah, and you don't even have the impression that they're thinking it's going to last. They more know that it's like a blaze of an intersection,
Yeah.
and the limousine's already waiting while they're in the
Yeah.
in the middle of it, and then it's done. Yeah, but
And,
he's talked about how his music. He said something like, some people are more inclined to say hello with their music, but I'm rather more valedictory. That's what he said.
What does valedictory
Like
mean?
saying goodbye, like the valedictorian's address.
Interesting.
You know, so many of his songs really are about some form of parting or goodbye or an imperfection or something, or like the broken hallelujah.
Yeah,
But the
that's
thing that's so incredible about him is the way that he's taking all of that and pointing it in the direction of transcendence. Like it's not just pure sadness, it's sadness and beauty. And that's the thing.
Yeah, there is a feeling of transcendence in a lot of the songs. It's like sadness and transcendence. You're right. It's a goodbye, but you're moving on to some bigger thing. But in a sort of ethereal way, like not like a proud, arrogant way.
Yeah. So his favorite poet was Garcia Lorca. He actually named his daughter after him. His daughter's name is Lorca. And he talks about how there's some poem that Lorca had written that made him realize that the universe itself was aching, but the ache was okay because that's the way you embrace the sun and the moon. And
Yeah.
that's what I think is. That's why I think there's this whole rich vein in this bittersweet tradition that he embodies. That's like the essence of beauty. You know, it's the way you embrace the sun and the moon.
The song Hallelujah, I return to that often. I've been meaning to play it. I have now a friend who wants to sing it with me. It's
Are you a singer?
What is when somebody says they're a singer, do they have to be good? Because then no. But I would say yes. I was in a band for a while. I sang for a while. I was always bad, but I enjoy it. I enjoy lyrics. I enjoy words.
Yeah.
When sung or spoken, they capture something. Like again, that moment. Tom Waits is a huge favorite of mine for that reason. Although his lyrics are often not that simple. I'd rather have a bottle in front of me than a frontal lobotomy. He's always playing with just like these weird